Hello adventurers, I am the Welsh DM, the one Welshman whose accent got a little bit scared and went and hid behind the sofa. There is a common understanding in the TTRPG community online that Halloween is D&D Christmas. It's the time of year that us weird folks who like casting spells and making deals with devils gather in basements to fight vampires, get scared by ghosts, and stare eldritch horrors in the face. The thing is, if you're anything like me, running horror games is actually quite difficult. They're not anything like the traditional fantasy of games like D&D and Pathfinder. So the question is, what do we need to learn and figure out to run an okay horror TTRPG for our friends this Halloween? I do not profess to be an expert on horror. I am an absolute scaredy cat who avoids horror films at all costs and spends a lot of the time hiding behind the sofa. But I have picked up a few tips and tricks here and there that might help you run a pretty decent game of scary D&D. Ultimately though, I think if you're going to run a game of spooky D&D, the fact of you actually running it for Halloween is going to be more than enough for most people. And provided you're making it a fun, if terrifying experience, you're probably doing a darn good job. Anyway, let's discuss how to run okay horror in TTRPGs. As with all GMing, we have to start before the game does. Horror type games, more than any kind of game in TTRPGs, need a good session zero. I've covered running okay session zeros in this series before, but crucially when it comes to horror kinds of games, it is imperative that you cover the safety tools that you're going to use for this adventure. The reason for this is people need to feel comfortable enough at the table that they can let themselves be scared. It's a social contract. Your players should be coming to the table ready to be vulnerable and ready to be terrified by what you put in front of them, and the best way to do that is to allow them to be comfortable that you're not going to put things in front of them that are an absolute no-no. Remember, we're still trying to have an enjoyable time, even if we're getting scared in the process. Think of it like a roller coaster at a theme park. When you are queuing up to get onto the roller coaster, you can see bits and pieces of it going past that gets you in the frame of mind for what you're about to experience. And you can decide whether it's not actually for you and just walk away. It doesn't detract from the ride in any capacity, but it allows people to set the expectations of the experience they're about to have. And besides, even when there's topics that people really want to avoid, like spiders for arachnophobia, there are plenty of other horror genres and topics out there that you as a GM can use. Speaking of which, use this opportunity to figure out what genre of horror you and your players want to play in. There's so many options, from your slasher movies like Halloween and Friday the 13th, to gothic horror like Dracula and Nosferatu, to eldritch horror that you could experience in Cthulhu and Lovecraftian novels. Or even good old Scooby-Doo! Each one provides a slightly different tone or style of adventure that you get to explore and experience. I know I, for one, would actually love a Scooby-Doo one-shot for Halloween. By discussing this at your session zero, you and your players know what kind of energy and what kind of characters to bring to the actual adventure, which is pretty key if you're running a one-shot for Halloween where you don't have a lot of time to get everyone's opinions aligned. And once you know the genre you want to experience, you can think about what game you actually want to play. Yeah, D&D has Curse of Strahd and the famous Curse of Strahd in One Night adaptation that is perfect for Halloween, but it doesn't necessarily make it the right choice for your game. There have been plenty of other TTRPG systems that have been designed specifically for horror. You can explore sci-fi horror with Mothership or the Alien RPG, Lovecraftian horror with the classic Call of Cthulhu or the more modern Candela Obscura from Darrington Press, or if you're just looking for that high-octane slasher fic, dig out your Jenga tower and play Dread. All of them are great, and they provide you as the GM and the players bespoke systems that lean into that side of horror and being scared and adding stress to players that is probably going to make your experience that much more horrifying, scary, or spooky at the table. And with all of that in place, you can then go away as the GM and begin to research. Watch some of your favourite horror movies that fit the type of game you're about to play. Read some books or comic books that might invoke that sense of terror, and come up with some concoctions on how to absolutely terrify your friends. You know, in a loving way. Now, the key to good horror is atmosphere. With the right tone and feeling invoked in your sessions, you can bring horror even into the middle of a traditional fantasy campaign. Simply put, trying to run horror with people not in the right mood or frame of mind isn't going to be easy, so you need to find shortcuts to get them there. Atmosphere is a bit of an ephemeral, vague concept, so it's hard to exactly describe, but if you think back to your horror movies that you've watched in your life, or those knights telling spooky stories around the campfire, you'll get the feeling that you're looking for. That sense of unease, like there's something in the corner of your vision you can't quite see, a heightened sense of awareness and yet not able to perceive the thing that's following you. And there's a few ways we can stimulate this in our games of make-believe at the table. First of all, finding the right ambience or piece of music goes a long way at the table. Maybe something that's only slightly audible, forcing the players to have to really listen in to pick up on the subtle cues, heightening that sense of dread. Or maybe something with that eerie violin that just sets them into that gothic, creepy mood that makes them a little uneasy, that every so often it spikes or sows discord into the scene and everyone feels more on edge. Honestly, people don't appreciate a good audio track until it's not there, so think carefully about what you're going to be playing in the background as you go through your game. Also, lighting. This is especially good to do if you're running an in-person session. Turn your main lights off, use small lamps if you can, or even like tea light candles in the center of the table. That underlighting will invoke that sense of spooky tales around the campfire and put everyone in the right frame of mind while feeling like they're sucked into the game because everything else is darkness around them. You can do this virtually as well if you get your players to buy in and have them turn off all of their lights and dim their computer monitors as much as possible so they really have to focus in and forget about the world around them. Beyond these kind of sensory tricks though, taking the time at the outset of your game to set the tone can go a long way. It's about getting everyone in the right frame of mind for the kind of game they're about to experience. Use the opening section of your game, or each session if it's part of a larger campaign, to set the scene, set the player and character's mood and expectations so they know that something is slightly off with the game and they should be expecting something disconcerting. Another trick I've seen, especially in horror TTRPGs, is messing with the standard way fantasy TTRPGs are played. Instead of that standard setup with the GM at the head of a table behind a screen and everyone else arranged around them, change this up and set that feeling that something is different than it otherwise should be. You could have everyone sit in the round around a table, know one point where the GM is. Maybe even the players are sat down at the table and the GM moves around in the darkness behind them, telling the story, never in the same place at any one time. Alternatively, you could take it back to those spooky stories you told as a kid where there is no table, there is no setup, just everyone in one room telling a spooky story collaboratively together. Ultimately, what we're trying to do with all these shortcuts is get our players and ourselves into the right mindset for the horror genre, for those spooky stories around the campfire, and for a willingness to get scared but have fun with it. Look, I'll be honest, running horror games, not usually my thing. But I have picked up a few tips and tricks from more talented GMs through the years that have helped me run horror-style adventures and sessions for my games. And at the top of that list is understanding just how important pacing is. Being slow and deliberate with your descriptions goes a long way. Allowing your words and the rhythm of your voice to suck your players in, forcing them to pay attention and really realize the danger that they're in. And then being able to speed things up rapidly, get the heart racing, invoke that sense of being chased by a monster, desperately fleeing through the forest, unable to look behind in fear of being caught. Not giving your players a chance to think, forcing them to think on their gut reactions alone, never having a chance to think about the optimal solution, instilling panic in them as the scene reaches its climax. The point is, wielding pace like an effective tool allows you to suck your players in and invoke senses that you want them to feel at the table. Now, hand in hand with this is your word choice. Be intentional with your words. Take care to find that right adjective or verb that gets across the sense of dread or revulsion you're looking for in your players. This is where using that slow pacing helps, because you give yourself more time to think and you can let the pauses linger while your brain racks to find the word you actually want to use to keep the sense of dread going. A great tip is finding words with that sense of onomatopoeia, because it invokes certain thoughts in players' heads because they hear it on two different levels. They force people to imagine what is happening. And speaking of words, a trick I got taught a while ago is to both over-describe and under-describe. Under-describing forces your players to fill in the blanks, their own imagination coming up with far greater terrors than you could possibly hope to describe, while over-describing allows you to hammer home the specific point you're going for, reinforcing the image in their head, adjective after adjective after verb until they can't help but picture it in the most horrifying way possible. And lastly, when it comes to running the game, relish in the extremes. The advantage of using a TTRPG to get all spooky this season over, say, a campfire scary story is you have the mechanics of the game telling you just how bad or good things go. And I think the best way of utilizing that is taking the extremes of the system and pushing them further than you would in a normal game. A critical success might give the players a one-up on a monster that might have felt undefeatable. That miraculous moment when they find a weakness in the monster that they can exploit and give them chance to escape. Think how many slasher horror movies where they find a Molotov cocktail just when they need it before the monster brings down the machete upon them. Meanwhile, if a player suffers a critical failure, that's when you as the GM get to get really visceral. Unleash the full scale of the terror and detail exactly what goes wrong and just how bad it is for the player's character. This is when characters end up on meat hooks for the monster to come back to deal with later. You know, fun stuff. Now, I want to use this opportunity to stop talking to the GMs for a second and talk to the players. GMs, feel free to send this part of the video to them. You lot need to understand your responsibility when it comes to making an okay horror adventure. Because too often I see people ruining a good horror adventure because they refuse to buy in. Stop trying to be cool. Stop trying to be the person who subverts the genre. Stop trying to be the one who beats the game. Look, I get it. We've all been there watching a horror movie, calling the main characters stupid for the actions that they take and claiming we would do better. But that's not the point. You have to recognize when you're playing the game, you are those dumbass characters. Your character does not know they're in a horror story, so stop acting like they do. Characters in horror films make stupid decisions. That's the whole point. You don't have a horror movie if the campers go home at the first sign of odd behavior. If you're going to play in a horror game, even just a one-shot on Halloween, you have to open yourself up to being scared. Your GM is putting in a lot of effort for this, to build the atmosphere, to write the adventure, to find the right scary monster that puts everyone on edge. So don't be the one that breaks that immersion or ruins the genre on a whole by making a bunch of unnecessary funny quips all of the time. There's a phrase that gets used in a lot of places that I think is very appropriate here. Leave your ego at the door. You don't have to be the cool guy that gets it right every time. In fact, you'll probably have more fun if you deliberately get it wrong. And honestly, this advice is good for every game. It's just for horror games, that atmosphere, that tension is so easy to break if you're not paying attention that I would recommend taking deliberate effort to make sure you don't. Other than this, just make sure that you're paying attention. Look, I get it, it's very easy to be distracted, we occasionally need fidgets, or we get distracted by our phones, but one of the easiest ways to completely ruin the mood that a GM has just set up is asking them to repeat what they just said in describing a room. There's only so many ways you can describe absolutely horrifying scenes as a GM, and repeating yourself sounds crappy. Let yourself be drawn in. Buy into the fiction in the world and live in the moment and be absolutely terrified. And lastly, and I sort of mentioned this already, fuck up! Make mistakes, because that's what the characters in these movies do. That's what this genre thrives on. It thrives on stupid teens at the lake trying to fight back against the 6'6" hulked out murderer rather than simply running away and calling the police. It leads the game to having more horror, and isn't that why we're here in the first place? At the end of the day, running horror games is a really fun experience if you're up for it. But you do have to be up for it. I'm sure there are many people out there that can just pick up and run a horror game on a whim, but for a lot of us, it requires a bit of thought to pull off even a pretty decent game that everyone enjoys. Although doing that kind of campy, fun, Scooby-Doo style game does sound quite fun. Regardless though, Halloween is Nerd Christmas, and I think everyone, regardless of their upbringing, deserves a little bit of spooks this time of year. If you're looking for a little bit of inspiration, go check out Nocturnes and Nightmares or Vecna's Book of Vile Darkness by Runic Press on the DMs Guild. Both will be linked in the description below, and both go into running those kind of dark, horror-themed games and give GMs a bunch of tools to make them come to life. While you're there, you can also pick up my new adventure, The Crown of Endless Dark, that is a dark tier 3 campaign that might be perfect for your Halloween one-shot. What I will say is, regardless of your preference for games, use this time of year as an excuse to try out running horror. Because even if it's not your usual style of game, it exposes you to a different form of TTRPG and prepares us GMs for those kind of situations if we experience them in future. But I think that's quite enough horror talk for this week. I think I need to go watch a comedy or something. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like or drop a comment below with your favourite genre in horror, both of which help to keep the monster that is the algorithm at bay just a little bit longer. And if you enjoy this sort of content, why not subscribe to the channel and check out the rest of the OKGM playlist for more advice like this. Anyway, I do believe that's it. I don't want to talk about the horror genre any longer than I have to. So, until we do this again, you keep an eye out for dragons. I'm going to go save my accent from the serial killer in the basement. And remember to keep telling stories. I've been subjected to too many horror films this year, so this video is making it worth it. At the end of the day,